Welcome to the Microsoft Security Insights Podcast with your hosts, Franklin Grimberg and Edward Walton, where we discuss Microsoft 365 security and Azure security news and products. Recorded July 14th, 2021. Good evening, Franklin. How are you?
Good evening, Edward. How are you?
I'm Frank today. See my name?
Yeah.
It's Frank. I got an upgrade, so
It's
I'm
my
all right.
teaching Microsoft people how to use Zoom. You're in lesson 1, how to log in right now.
But hey, you sent me the wrong password, man. Now I'm going to take that password that you sent and I'm going to credential stuff, password spray everything, all your accounts, because it came from somewhere.
That's right.
It came from somewhere. I'm going to look at it. It's pretty. I'm like, this looks real delivery. Give me now. But no, things are good. It's Wednesday. It's a quiet time in Microsoft. Everybody's trying to do the things that they used to do the things before the pandemic, but it's not the right things that we used to do before the pandemic. So we're trying to have Spark, trying to have Inspire, Ignite's coming, Ready's coming if you're a Microsoft FTE. People taking time off at Microsoft. It's the end of the fiscal year. Roles are changing. People are doing stuff. It's just atypical, right? For me, I think you and I talked about it. Lots of certifications to renew. So I got to renew the AZ500, the MS500. I got approval for the 508 GAC exam.
Excellent.
I should get my voucher here in the next couple of weeks. And then once I prove myself and I have the time, the offensive security cert, I think you have one of them, maybe two. But you told me that's a time commit. It's not to be taken. But
I'll take my OSEP exam probably at the end of September. I just don't want to do it during the summer with my schedule. But I've been through the class, been through the labs, and learned a lot. So looking forward to applying what I learned to my M365 labs to see how much I can get through. So probably the most important thing is, the OSCP is an excellent exam. You just have to realize how much time it takes, and it takes a lot of time. So for someone that's working and everything that you do, you're like, okay, do I have a spare 3 months to actually go through this class and spend time on it? That's really difficult. I still think Forensics 508 is the best for anybody that's working with Defender for Endpoint, even out to Sentinel, so you understand that the raw data that's coming in and how to identify things. So I'm glad to hear that you'll be getting in the Forensics 508, because that's 1 week. If you stay there, focus, study, that's the best, for your time and value.
Yeah, I'm going to focus down. I think I'm used to that commitment, having to go through the 555, the advanced analytics and SIEM. So I think I got one more exam here. I'm going to go back and take that SC200 exam and show up on time. I'm actually going to go back through your Learn modules again. So claim to fame, Thomas Franklin helped contribute a majority of the SC200 Learn material on Microsoft Learn. So anytime I don't pass an exam, he gives me grief. This time I didn't pass, but it wasn't my fault. Well, it was my fault. I was the one that can't tell time and show up on time. So I think I got failed as a no-show. Even though I took the exam, they didn't fill out the paperwork because I was late. So
we go over this every single podcast about what happens when I was SC200.
And then he had me put a trouble ticket in because, hey, write a trouble ticket, let them know so and so. I did that. They wiped all my creds. I was no longer certified. Couldn't even work in the industry anymore. Like, you'll never work in show business again around here. Kind of find out they had merged my accounts with Learn with my MSA account with a Microsoft account or something, but they finally got it finished. So I can see all my stuff. So when I went back to see my SC200, it said I failed, but it doesn't give you the improvement things. And so if you do a little bit of this, a little bit of search, I say, okay, they failed me as a no-show because I was late. Then
Edward this week went to an SC200 prep course. It was like 2 hours a day for 3 days or something like that. He sent me the link saying, hey, do you want to go to this? And I replied, why? I've already passed my SC200.
Yeah. Well, you could learn some better instructing techniques. Had you instructed me better, you'd been a better sensei, right?
Show up on time. I mean, what else can you?
I couldn't find a place. But anyway, this is the type of banter that we have, Thomas, right? You can tell that Franklin and I are friends, right? I mean, begrudgingly, right?
Yeah, I mean, sharing the same name must be like awesome already, right?
That's what it is, right? He's running from some law enforcement. Either CIA, Interpol, somebody he's running from, right? Yeah, I keep getting in trouble. I keep getting swatted. They come into my house. But hey, thank you so much for. Well, hold on. Before we go, we always go through a couple of things. Franklin, anything interesting on this week for you? You work on
Absolutely
anything
nothing.
cool?
Absolutely nothing.
Okay. Me, you need to have change control. Do not make major changes to your network that you depreciate huge swath of your networks in your digital transformation. Don't swap firewalls. Don't swap WAN technologies between SD-WAN and whatever you were using. And then all of a sudden things don't talk back. Had a customer, MDI work, all the sensors across dozens of domain controllers can't talk back. Why? They changed all the firewall rules. So none of the domain controllers are taught to the internet. And so they want to fix. And like, well, here are the endpoint URIs, URLs, URIs, one or two. All right, whatever. Use them interminglingly, right? And then Microsoft gives you a range of IP addresses because they're load balanced and they distribute this globally for you to be able to talk back to that. And they were pushing back like, man, these are thousands of IP addresses. Like, yeah, it's a global service. Load balancing, being able to take down some endpoints for service, still be able to manage, have this SaaS service, right? And so I said, well, did anyone talk to the networking team about this? Did anyone talk to them? Well, we didn't think. I got it. So now I say, well, the fix that I'm used to in the field, I understand you do not want your domain controllers talking unobstructed to the internet, behind firewall or not. Experience says put a proxy in front of your domain controllers, have them talk to the proxy, and then the proxy you can put all this stuff in. They didn't want to do that. Like, I don't know. Then put in 5,000 IP addresses. I don't know what to tell you. So that's the interesting part of mine. And then I noticed something else. If the sensors go down for MDI, it causes Active Directory DHCP to spin up for some reason and looks like it's doing some type of network scanning, even though domain controls are never DHCP. But that was the cause of it. Don't know why. So I'll figure out why it did that. I don't know if it was SOAs, resource records, maybe sites and services and ADs trying to converge the sites, the subnets that are defined in sites and services. I don't know, but I saw it and I thought it was a scan. I'm like, oh my crap. As soon as MDI goes down, some bad guys in here doing that, but it really wasn't. It was the domain controllers doing it. And I got to figure out why it was doing it. I've never seen them reference a DHCP for some type of record. But I didn't go through the configuration in DHCP, like, boot key and all this other stuff. It could be doing something. So that was interesting for me. Sentinel, lots of workbook updates. Customers reaching out and say, hey, do we update the workbooks? I might clone them. If you got your workbook customized, clone your workbook before you decide to update because it's going to go away, right? Copy the JSON, do something. So day in the life of us, as Rod would say, day in the life of a SOC wannabe analyst, right? What about you, Frank? Did you kill any cicadas? Did the dogs go crazy with the leaves?
But I did see that Rod put out a something on LinkedIn about Microsoft expanding some detections for dealing with OAuth or something like that, which I did want to bring up. And so I think that's such a high value target, right? Or what everybody's targeting today. I think that's very important to bring up.
That's an easy fix if you don't mind a little disruption in your organization. 365 tenant, admin page, org settings. Don't let anybody. You don't allow individual within your org to give permissions inside your org for auth 2. The internal MCAS to be able to track this stuff to see these application connected apps, right?
Right. So there's Microsoft delivers comprehensive solution about a rise of consent phishing emails, which I think is, like I said, one of the favorite ways for people to get in today. So that's an important link for people to take a look at.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get a chance to really review it today, but I saw that come across, and that's on my reading list now for sure.
I started reading it. I reshared Rod's LinkedIn post. He's one of the few blogs that I read. And I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, go in and turn off the ability for your you're using your organization to give consent to these apps. That's the first thing. I know it's going to cause a little disruption, right? But it would automatically exclude security administrator and up. Yeah, security administrator, GA, exchange administrator are excluded from being able to do that. But the normal atypical user, it's a pop-up box that everybody sees. You just go, yes.
Right.
And then next thing you go to MCAS, you see all of these apps that have permissions, right? Microsoft is notorious for that. So when you're in a private preview, it asks for that same type of permission. So I can see that external traffic because I joined a Microsoft-owned team and they wanted permission to do something. And I'm like, why is Katrina Quick wanting permissions to my organization in my lab? But that's an easy fix for those who want to do it. I'm going to finish reading it. And I had to hit Rod up today to help me out with something because I had forgotten how to do mass analytic rules in Sentinel. I'm like, hey man, how can I do this? What happened to go one by one, create the rule? He said, well, you could do the API. I was like, oh yeah, you can do that. But when I went through the API, it doesn't look like it gave you write permissions. And the docs page for the API, how to do it, is down. Why they updated? And then he said, hey man, you could use the PowerShell module. I was like, you're right, Rod. So I had to download the Azure PowerShell module to my laptop, and then you can do mass enablement of all the analytic rules in Sentinel. So I learned that. I relearned it today.
Whenever Rod posts anything on watch lists on Twitter, he actually tags me, pointing out the functionality just to let me have it. You have to understand, Thomas, I always considered watch lists the most useless function capability with inside Sentinel, because it basically, you could create the watch list, you could query against it, but you could not edit the watch list. There was no automation there to do anything with it. So in KQL, you have commands that you can go out to blob storage and read things in, and you can then automate. You could automate that, but you could not really automate watch lists that were native with inside Sentinel, right? So it was an ongoing thing. So now whenever there's these improvements, I always get tagged about it from there.
So to all our friends over at Microsoft in the engineering and PG about watch lists, there's two different Franks. It's this Frank on the bottom that's saying that, not this Frank. I love watch lists. I've got a good use for it too.
There's nothing wrong with the concepts of watch lists. I'm just saying it was not a robust feature.
I found
inside the product.
Remind me when we have the next one. I'll talk about it with you. And I found a pretty cool use for the watch list in combination with monitoring leak credentials on the dark web, or anybody that's feeding TI to it.
There you go.
Yeah. So I play around with it.
I mentioned the name Thomas. So who do we have on this week?
So we had the guy Thomas Maurer. Did I say your last name correct, sir?
Yes,
Close enough?
That's correct.
All right.
Yeah.
He invented the internet as well as Azure Arc. That's what I heard. That's what the show notes, the bio say. Created the internet in conjunction with Al Gore.
That's a slightly upgraded bio, but only by that much. Like, it's only that much upgraded.
All seriousness, he is a program manager at Microsoft, and his claim to fame is things around Azure Arc. I could give you a very rudimentary understanding and explanation what Azure Arc is. Just think extending security controls and wrappers outside of a SaaS, PaaS, IaaS platform to those who are still on premise, who have yet to make the digital transformation, or they're in a hybrid mode, and that may be long term, but you want those capabilities. So I am not an Azure CSA like Rod is, but I do get exposure to these questions around Azure Arc. Like, hey, I still have these legacy things. When I used to cover healthcare, I saw a lot of inquiries around Arc because they use a lot of old technology that they cannot modernize very quickly, but they need those protections extended. So my exposure to Arc has almost been primarily healthcare. Probably education is probably number two. Legacy stuff, sort of old, still need the protections. But I will let Thomas talk about his claim to fame, his superpowers, and whatever he wants to talk about today. And I'll be quiet and drink from the red cup. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Edward and Frank, for having me. Thank you very much, Rod, who is not here, but obviously appreciate connecting me here. So I actually did not invent Azure Arc, but I obviously talk a lot about the service and the product and what it does. And also, obviously, that's one part of my job is actually to go out and speak to different communities and customers and like talk about and Azure, like Azure related things, as well as obviously my focus is on hybrid and multi-cloud technologies with Azure Arc. And the other big part is also very interesting is like gathering feedback from our customers, right? I mean, that's like everyone in Microsoft is doing that, but this is also a big part. Obviously, when we go out, we create content. We also gather the feedback. We want to like bridge basically the part between our customers and engineering as well. And that's like basically where we say we are cloud advocates, not just for Microsoft in the communities and at our customers, but also advocates for the customers inside Microsoft. And I think that is a big part of what I'm doing. And again, as you said, I'm focusing very much on Azure Arc these days. I do a lot around the different technologies, and Azure Arc is just a huge service, or it's like multiple services, if you will. It does so many different things, or it can enable customers to do many different things. And if you want to do it, like describe it on a high level, what Azure Arc does, it basically allows you to use the Azure management and the Azure control plane, our management services, as well as our control plane with Azure Resource Manager, and a lot of other cool stuff we have in there, anywhere. So that is one part where we actually can say, hey, if you have servers, not just running in Azure, but you have servers and Kubernetes clusters and others running on premises, or even at other cloud providers, right? For customers who have a multi-cloud strategy, they can use Azure as a control plane. That is the one part we're doing, and that is probably the one which is especially interesting for people doing security. The other thing which Azure Arc does, which is another big part, is actually enables customers to run Azure services outside of Azure, right? So for example, we had customers saying like, hey, Azure SQL is great. I want to use it like as crazy as I can, but we have certain requirements. We have, for example, like data sovereignty challenges, right? Where we can't store data outside of the country and we don't have an Azure region there, or the latency for our applications is just too big, or we have like no connectivity at all. And so what the engineering teams and the Arc teams came up with said, hey, well, let's just, if a customer cannot use the Azure service in Azure, let's just bring the Azure service to them. And so that's the other big part of Azure Arc, which allows you to basically deploy Azure services outside of Azure. So very high level, as you can see, but very interesting stuff you can do with Azure Arc.
So
go ahead. Let me just ask the one-off question. You always got the guy that wants to ask the crazy question like this.
What's the pricing?
So what if you have a high-performing customer that has offshore drilling, right? Bandwidth is notoriously, even with the most powerful SATCOM, is horrible, right? They decided to deploy Azure Stack, right? Do you still need Azure Arc if you have an Azure Stack in a place that's still holding legacy servers and things that need to be protected? Or do you like, no, let Azure Stack do its thing here, and then or would the Azure Arc agent report to the stack that then reports to the cloud? Or would you say, no, that's not a use case. You need to go to the real cloud, not the fake cloud?
No, that's a fantastic question. So yeah, obviously we still have the Azure Stack solutions, which absolutely serve that purpose of like bringing you this cloud-inspired infrastructure and that consistency with the Azure portal on places where you can't run it. However, Azure Arc is designed basically to run on top of basically any infrastructure, right? You don't need, like for customers who are probably invested in like VMware environments, for example, or they have like already some other hardware or whatever laying around that they don't have an Azure Stack. they can run it on that too, right? And they can connect these systems up to Azure as well. If they have Azure Stack or customers who prefer an all-up Microsoft solution, they can run it on their existing Azure Stack Hub, for example. But we also have a new solution called the Azure Stack HCI for hyperconverged infrastructure, which also enables them to basically say, hey, I want to have an all-up solution because I need some hardware, I need some infrastructure, right? Like these offshore locations, they need some infrastructure there. So I'm going to build an Azure Stack HCI cluster, run my VMs on top of it, or even my Kubernetes clusters. And we can do that by basically bringing, by the way, AKS on top of Azure Stack HCI. And then we can connect that up to Azure using Azure Arc. And the other thing which I want to clarify, that was you brought up at the point, and yes, so Azure Arc really needs to connect, like if you have the Arc agent, it needs to connect to like the Azure cloud. It cannot connect to an existing Azure Stack environment, right? I think that was one of the questions you just highlighted. It is designed to go to like the Azure cloud. But however, again, if something is running on Azure Stack, you can connect that up to Azure as well with Azure Arc. Does that hopefully make sense? A lot of connecting and a lot of solutions and stuff.
No. That makes perfect sense. Being able to figure out where that separation of connectivity and oversight resides, right? You can run both. You can have Azure Stack sitting next to you, but still have a need based on your industry that you still are running hardware, right? Yep. Because they may have a very specific application that I need to monitor the oil flow coming out of a pipe, right? And I can't run this in the cloud, but I still need the protections that the cloud sort of offers because it's cool, right? And it works.
Yep. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is like where we'll probably also differentiate a little bit against like other solutions out there, is that we have, if we talk about hybrid or multi-cloud in Microsoft, there's not just one product or service which say, hey, this is it, right? A lot of people just always want to like have this one solution and this does everything. But we realize, as you all know, like customers have different requirements and different scenarios. And so we obviously offer different services and solutions, and they can combine these. If they have both needs, then yeah, let's combine these two.
So let me do the easy side first, and then we'll go over to the newer side. So the easy side first is basically adding on-prem resources. So with inside, let's say Sentinel or other or Azure Defender, it's one-click deployment of agents and so on, because it's actually seen as a so when you install the Azure Arc agent on those hosts, on-prem hosts, then they just look like a resource that's actually available to you with inside Azure. So 2 questions there. Does that work for Linux servers?
Yes. Simple answer, yes.
Okay. The next question is from a management standpoint, how do you, we have resource groups and you're breaking things. So how are people managing those? We'll just utilize servers for, we're not going to talk about the other services out there, and grouping them together for managing them. Is there a way to deal with that from like we think resource groups and so on? How is that managed?
Yep. So this is actually a good point, and especially because you mentioned that we install the agent on, let's say, servers, or again, this I will repeat myself multiple times, but also obviously Kubernetes clusters, which basically have the same scenarios as well. And you brought up a very good point. These are actually then becoming basically Azure native resources, right? They show up as an Azure resource, and why I'm stressing this so hard is because it is not just like, okay, we install an agent and show the name of the server shows up in the portal or something like that, and that's it. It actually really is a part of the Azure Resource Manager and becomes an Azure resource. So with all the benefits Resource Manager provides, as you just mentioned, like resource groups, tagging, all that stuff cannot just now be used for resources or servers running in Azure, like Azure VMs. It can also now be used for servers running in your own data center. Or, for example, underneath my desk here, I have a couple of servers running. and I can use that for them there as well. And I can use the same organizing structures and the same tooling there to achieve the same thing I do with my Azure VMs. I can now do that for all my servers in one place. I can even start using Azure Resource Graph and other tools to basically to run queries and go through that and all of that cool stuff.
So do any of
ahead,
the policies or any of that float down to any of that, or is that ignored?
That's why you read my mind. So the next thing is obviously we can use Azure policy to apply policies, not just to Azure environment, but obviously the Azure VMs. With Azure Arc now, we can also apply the same set of policies, basically, or well, let's say currently a subset of the policies to servers and even Kubernetes clusters again outside of Azure. And we can use, for example, there's one of my favorite ones I always show is, for example, we have this policy to find insecure password settings, right, for your servers. And you want to see that all your servers are actually compliant with that, or whatever the rule may be. But and you can apply this to your Azure VMs. And with Azure Arc now, you can also apply these policies also for servers running outside of Azure.
All right, so before we get back to Kubernetes, let me do one simple question here. Is there any reason to install this on a desktop?
You kind of read my mind. You bring up all my good points. So officially, we are just supporting servers, right? In production environments, you do it on servers. You do it this can be Linux and Windows servers, different distributions of the, Linux as well. And I was always saying, okay, this is the way to go. But then I talked to someone from the identity team, and he said, well, I installed that on my Windows 10 machine. And I said, well, why would you do that? And he came back and said, well, the cool thing, and this is, by the way, true because it's really awesome, by installing the Azure Arc agent, the server you installed that agent on now gets a managed identity. Right, for an Azure VM, you have the managed identities which you can use, which are super handy if you need to do something. And now you can have that for your Azure Arc enabled servers as well. And now, obviously, if you do that on a desktop, he's a developer. He tries things out. He wants to use a managed identity to do certain things. He can do that. However, again, we don't officially support that, but in some versions of the agent it works, and so you can, if you play around it, if you're a dev and play around with it, you can actually make it work. But again, very good use case if you're running servers and you want to deal with authentication. Now with the Azure Arc agent, you get this managed identity.
So with that, and I've read the docs, but I want to hear a human say it. What is the difference, or are they the same thing? The Azure Monitoring Agent and Azure Arc are the same thing, or just someone asked a question, hey, I have just deployed AMA on my stuff on premise, and do I still need to add Azure Arc? Are they mutually inclusive or exclusive?
So currently,
sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
So currently there's a Azure Arc agent, and you have you use the currently I should say in the past, when currently there's a little bit of I don't know which stage we are currently, but there was an Arc agent, and again the problem with it had not included the what is it called? The Azure Log Analytics agent or the Azure Monitoring agent was two separate agents, right? And obviously you can hear already people are thinking, oh God, another agent. I don't want that. And there's currently a work running that the idea of that is exactly going away, that we actually have the Azure Arc agent. And then these, for example, monitoring is a good part of it, but also think about the policy part. We just spoke about it, or think about the security part, think about update management and stuff like that. These all become extensions from the Azure Arc agent, right?
Yes.
Very similar to if you look at an Azure VM, we have the VM guest agent, and then you have the different resource providers which can hook into that. For example, if you do backup, if you do update management, monitoring, all of that in the portal is just a click, right? But that actually goes through this VM guest agent. And you can imagine that the Arc agent basically does kind of the same thing. It obviously is a little bit, needs some other capabilities as well. But obviously you don't want to have a world where we now have 200 agents or something you need to install on your machine. But again, there is some ways where you still need to have the both of it. And I am not 100% sure how far we are with that, but the strategy is definitely going there. Yeah.
Yeah, but today it's more of a thing. Yeah, of course, I'm thinking about Azure Defender and Azure Security Center. You need to install the Arc agent, and then everything else is one-click deployment for you. So here's my question. So, one of the things that when we're spinning up resources inside Azure, we don't really care about the hardware behind it, right? Are we hitting max capacity or whatever? That's just not a thing that we really care about. How is that, or is that even a consideration when Azure Arc and you're deploying Kubernetes clusters and saying, okay, well, everybody's doing too much, or we only have this much hardware here. How is that managed? Is something that we don't think about today when we're doing it inside Azure because we don't really care about the underlying hardware.
Yeah. So absolutely. So if you're doing that outside of Azure, it's something you need to take care of, right? You cannot deploy more capacity than you actually have available physically, right? This is just the way it is. Since we're currently not reading into, like, for example, VMware or like AWS environments and see, like, obviously what's going on there, we can only show you, for example, like what is assigned to a Kubernetes cluster, and then we can obviously see that. Like on the server side, we cannot really do a management. Like there's an asterisk on this. If you're running, for example, Azure Stack HCI, like again, we talked about this earlier, it's basically our hyper-converged infrastructure solution to do virtualization and run like a lot of workloads. Azure Stack HCI actually has Azure Arc already built in. So your Azure Stack HCI cluster shows up in the Azure portal as well. And from there, you can actually see how much capacity is still on that physical fabric, right? And that's then a cool thing because you can then see, okay, hey, like if I run multiple environments, you just mentioned these offshore environments before, or like your branch offices, or we have customers, we have retail stores, for example, who are running like, who need to run a couple of servers. They have small deployments, small Azure Stack HCI clusters deployed. But those are like hundreds of them, right? All over the place. And it's very hard for them to actually monitor them. But with Azure Arc and the connection to the cloud, they can easily take advantage of the management capabilities we have there and actually see, hey, that Azure Stack HCI cluster, for example, that is like almost overcommitted, or I don't have any space anymore on this one. And then get an alert. They can use, for example, something like Azure Monitor to get an alert and send out, hey, the capacity of that Azure Stack HCI cluster is gone. Again, if you do that on, like I mentioned, that you can do that, like deploy these Arc services on basically anything. You could even deploy that on a physical machine, right, directly without any virtualization layer. Then we can't really do that for you, right? So you obviously need to keep track of that in this sense. But again, if you go full stack Microsoft, you can take advantage of that.
So let me have a one-off scenario where maybe Arc is not the use, and the better use is MDE, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Let's flip over to retail, and you get to one of these point of sale terminals, right? Is there a use case where the customer doesn't deploy MDE? And I don't work in retail. I guess I need to ask one of my peers. Do they put it on these point of sale systems that they often run a Windows something? What is the minimum? Does that relate to similar to what that person who sort of played around with it and put it on the desktop to manage identity, or that's a little elephant gun to shoot a flea? You should really stay with the desktop security products such as MDE to stay on it.
Yeah. So my recommendation on this is like if you have a desktop or client operating system, definitely stay with MDE, right? Don't go the Arc way. The Arc way, if you do it on your desktop, this is really just to play around with, like because you're a dev, you want to take advantage of it. But currently, we only support server versions, right? I think it's 2012 and higher in terms of Windows Server. and then a couple of like Linux distribution you can look up online. But again, if you have, like, I get this asked this question a lot, and as soon as you go into client space, obviously Arc doesn't want to be there. Like it's really MDM where you should be for these systems. But like they mentioned in the retail space, which I mentioned, they need to run a couple of different like server applications in those retail shops, right? And so that's where they're running. If they're point of sale system, I don't know if that's running a client operating system. I highly hope that they're going for MDM and not for Azure Arc.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're going to be doing a registered device and endpoint manager and Defender for endpoint for a regular workstation. So
the reason I asked that, Frank, is I've gone to some of these mom and pop shops, and I'm sure the big boy retailers don't do this, but there are some places that they are running Windows 10 as a server app, and they're doing that client server thing where all the point of sales talk to the thing that's in the back closet that talks back to court, and you think it's a 2012, 2016, 2019, whatever server. It's actually just running Windows 10 and acting like a server. And so,
they're running Windows for work groups, right?
You just dated yourself with that. Over Novell 3.12, right? Go do that. So one last question. I'm just thinking about a couple of scenarios around the Arc thing. So with Arc, if customers deployed it, where do the logs go? Where does the telemetry go? Can I use an existing LAW, or do you have to set up a very specific LAW for it? Right? Because once I get it in the logs, I want to get it over the Sentinel because I want to run some queries against it, right? So where do the logs go?
You can decide which log analytics workspace you want to connect it to. So you could use an existing one. If you're already using one, that's absolutely perfectly fine. If you don't have one and you already, for example, we have customers which are using Arc now for servers and they don't have really anything in Azure deployed. They're not that familiar with log analytics. They can just create a new one while they're onboarding the systems. And then obviously, as you said, it's then obviously a great next step to connect that then to Sentinel, right? And I think that is the power. But you're very flexible there. You don't have to build anything up for Arc specifically, right? It's really just going into the log analytics workspace. While you're onboarding, you enable that extension on the Arc agent. You basically say the workspace ID and the key, and then you can even do that from the portal and fire that up and connect it to an existing one.
So, I think that we have two different types of logs here. One is what you would expect, let's say, from the server and the logging that we're used to seeing. But are there, like an IoT, we can have specific logs that are dealing with the management of the IoT devices? Are there specific Arc logs for what's going on with inside Arc that can be tapped into and also looked at with inside Sentinel?
So quickly to clarify, I would not, if you go for the IoT scenario, I would also not really go for Arc.
I'm just saying that I was just saying that they have, when you look at IoT, there's the IoT management of devices logs versus logs or stuff, telemetry coming from the devices. Same here. Yeah. If I have a server, or a Windows server, that I want to be sending logs to Sentinel for security side, that's different than logs that Arc is generating for the management of the Arc devices. Right?
Okay. Yeah. So there is obviously logs for Arc, but we try to keep them very simple. So for example, customers who don't want sending logs actually to Azure, right? Because of certain reasons, we want to keep it very light. Basically, we send some metadata to your Azure connected region. When you connect the Azure Arc agent, you need to select a Azure region where this server connects to. And that is where basically then the metadata also gets stored. And this is basically more or less information about the server, for example, which operating system is it and things like that. We don't do a whole bunch of other things, except you go and enable Azure Log Analytics for that server. And then you have locally on the machine, you have a the Arc agent, or the Azure Connected Machine agent, as we call it, has a log there as well, but that writes basically if something is not working or one of the extensions is not working, and that is just basically locally written. There's no if you really want to have the security information, for example, you should enable that in the Azure Log Analytics agent for that, and we're basically taking advantage of the logging system. So, for example, in Windows, like for example the event logs and can I say it, like all the other logs we're collecting with Log Analytics. And same thing for the Linux world, we're going that route. There is obviously some stuff which goes on because we need to know, for example, the server, you want to see the server name and stuff like that, which goes into it, but not really anything else. Again, there's a couple of things which go in there, connected, if it's in connected state and stuff like that. I hope that makes sense. I hope that's
No, it definitely makes sense. I mean, I think people have connected machines in the past on-prem to Sentinel. Basically, when you connect the machine that's on-prem, normally you'd have to go out and manually install the agent. Here, if you install the Arc agent, it just becomes a machine available to you just like any other one. Click, and then those agents are moving forward. So it's really, the Arc agent is more of the management plane, not the functional plane that people are used to thinking about. So you said something which is, if you need to be running Azure SQL, so you're saying that we can run Azure SQL on-prem because of Azure Arc? Or is it just that Azure Arc is managing SQL servers that we have on-prem?
It's actually, that's again, I love the question. It's actually both. So we have obviously customers who leverage SQL Server. They have tons of them, and they probably want to also take advantage of some of the capabilities we have in Azure. For example, again, by sending those logs, we can then do we have some security solutions out there to do some assessments of the SQL servers. That is something they can enable and then have that benefit. But also the other part, absolutely. And I'm a little bit overexcited about this part. That's why I didn't mention the other part in that sense that heavily, because we just launched that. It just went GA, and it allows us to run Azure SQL Managed Instance outside of Azure. And again, this can mean, as you said, this can mean on-prem, so the customer can leverage that. But this can also mean, for example, if you're at another cloud provider and you don't like their database solution, you want to build applications. For example, if one of the scenarios I see often is now when you look at cloud architects or developers, if they need to build an application which not just runs in one cloud provider, it probably also should run at other cloud providers, and it should probably also run on-prem. It gets pretty complex, right? Because they will say, okay, if I now use these Azure PaaS services, like again Azure SQL, for example, or web apps, let's put that way, then they feel like they're building this architecture now only for Azure. And then they probably want to do that and build the same architecture now for another cloud provider. And then they need to build it for their on-prem environment. And they at one point end up in saying, well, let's just do it that it runs in a VM, for example, or something like that, and go back the old school way. But then at least we only need to do one architecture which works everywhere. Now, this is obviously the wrong approach there, but it was necessary, right? And so with Azure Arc now and enabling these PaaS services outside of Azure, cloud architects and developers can now go on and say, hey, I built this architecture of that application based on Azure PaaS services. Again, mention Azure SQL, web apps, app service, and stuff like that. And then I can use that and deploy that application basically anywhere, because these Azure services are now available anywhere.
Let me go ahead, Edward.
So let me just ask a question. Is Azure Arc a security product? It seems to be lifecycle server management, and it's sort of like it's a cousin of SCCM and Intune. Is it a security product, or is it a management product?
I would say it's not even just a management product. I think it's a management product which actually allows you to bridge resources which are running outside of Azure into the Azure control plane and the management. And then it allows you to actually use security solutions we have in Azure to enable them to run on systems which are outside of Azure, right?
Okay.
And it's not just security. This is also, as you said, like, for example, patch management, lifecycle management, policies, monitoring, all this stuff can be enabled wherever this is running using Azure Arc. And so Azure Arc is not just limiting, I would not say just security. Security is only one piece we are enabling with that. But it all comes down to actually say, hey, our customers do not have just Azure. They have on-premises, they have edge locations, they have multi-cloud environments. And Azure Arc is really just the bridge. You see what I did there between those worlds, and bring that everything under Azure. And then, obviously, as you said, this enables management, and it enables security, and enables a couple of other things.
One more question. I'm going to say on that topic before I forget, because I'm actually in the Azure Arc portal in my lab. One question is really two questions. Is it virtualization friendly, Hyper-V in VMware? And is it multi-cloud friendly? I mean, truly friendly to GCP, AWS, resellers. IBM, Oracle has cloud, right? So those are my questions.
Yep, absolutely. And the answer to all of these questions is basically yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So when your servers are running on top of VMware or Hyper-V, it's basically irrelevant for Azure Arc, because you have the agent in the guest operating system. And it basically connects that up. Same thing for, by the way, again, I'm mentioning just for Kubernetes clusters as well. Or if they're running in multi-cloud environments, like if you've done them in GCP or AWS, absolutely. You can absolutely connect these.
It sounds like you have to make an exception for a product for Kubernetes security, like Twistlock, to allow Azure Arc to run, because it's going to flag the way it's sort of, I won't say the word invasive, but maybe it's nosy. So I think the reason these questions are coming, because I keyed something up like, hey, this will call Twistlock to flag Kubernetes. Yep. And I'm like, so yeah, it probably will. You putting this thing on it, right? But you answered my question. Go ahead, Franklin. I'm sorry. I just wanted to get them off. I had them written down.
So if it was up to Thomas, the name of the product would be called Azure Bridge. Is that what I'm hearing?
Azure Bridge.
I like that too. Yes.
All right. So what I like to do is maybe Edward can share his desktop, or you can share your desktop, because explain to me the portal here just at the high level, what, because I see management, infrastructure, services, and just do a quick rundown of what each one of these are at a high level.
I can share my desktop. That way we wouldn't have to change over, guess. So give me a moment here. Teaching a Microsoft guy how to use, once again, use Zoom.
Lesson number 2 for tonight.
All right. How about that?
Awesome.
Yep, there we go.
Perfect. Yep. So where you are currently is like you're in the what we call like kind of like the Azure Arc center, or the one stop where you go when you want to use Azure Arc, or you want to onboard resources to Azure Arc. Mm-hmm. And as you can see here, there's a couple of interesting things happening. So in the middle, obviously, we get some information about it, and you can see like these 3 boxes here. The interesting two are, as we just mentioned, is add infrastructure. So that means you can add servers, as you can see here. You can add Kubernetes clusters. You can add existing SQL servers or Azure Stack HCI deployments. You can actually connect them here. Basically, it helps you to download the agent and then run a command to register that server or Kubernetes cluster or whatever it is to that. And then the other part is actually the services, which you have listed there, where you can actually go out, and if you are prepared for it, you can go out and create, for example, a SQL managed instance, app service, logic apps, functions. All of that is now available outside of Azure, and some of them are still in preview, and others are already GA. Now, the cool thing is you can obviously do it from here, but if you're, for example, using ARM templates, or your customers using ARM templates, or they use the CLI, the concept, how this works, will also work if you use the CLI. And so, for example, if you deploy a new service, you would go and say, hey, this service is now deployed to a specific Azure region, right? So you would say, okay, I want to deploy the managed instance, and you select the Azure regions. Now, to make it actually work with outside of Azure, we need to have, like, you need to create your own region, if you will. Like, for example, I have one called Tom's Data Center, and this is what the custom location actually is. So if you want to use, for example, these services on the left side, you need to create a custom location. And the custom location today is nothing else than a Kubernetes cluster running somewhere. Running, for example, I have one running here in my lab. I have one running at another cloud provider. And then I install the agent and make it a Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster. And then I can run another command to actually make it a custom location. And then what the cool thing, which happens if you go into the portal, well, you cannot see it because you don't have a custom location yet. But if you would now go and deploy a SQL managed instance, when you tap on regions, you would then be able to not just see the Azure regions, but also then see, for example, your custom location. So that is, but obviously you need to have one first connected.
Okay. So my other question is, because I'm the concept, the word, but what's the significance of the data controllers?
Yeah. So the data controller is a thing we use for the Azure SQL Managed Instance and also Postgres hyperscale. By the way, I just also want to clarify that when we always talk about, I always bring the example of Azure SQL Managed Instance, but obviously also will have support for Postgres. So the data controller is actually the thing which you deploy first. This is basically your how would I say, the controller. The name is very good, so it is hard to find another name for it.
Orchestrator?
Or orchestrator, exactly, which is the piece you deploy on premises, or again, wherever you want it. And then you go to the data controller and you can go out and deploy the SQL managed instance. Now, why would we do that? So there are two reasons for it. As you can see, and again, you're faster than I can talk. There's two scenarios, because some customers they have say, okay, well, the Kubernetes clusters, they need to run them on-prem, but they are still connected to Azure. That would mean the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster in direct mode, right? So you can deploy the data controller to a Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster directly outside of the portal, which is great. But then we have customers which say, hey, well, our environment is completely offline, but we still want to use Azure SQL managed instances in our environment. And that is where basically the indirect mode comes into play. And indirect could also mean disconnected, but it's the indirect sense actually so you are disconnected, but you still need to like export some data for billing reasons, for example. And then you need to upload this on a other PC or something for us to actually like do the billing, right? And make that happen. So there you have the two modes, how you can use that. And then you can go basically like using the data controller, you can use, for example, the SQL Management Studio. I think that's the name, or Data
Azure,
Studio. I think it's
Azure they call it Data Studio now.
Yeah.
I think you can also use VS Code.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I think there's an extension even for this. But if you use Azure Data Studio, you can then connect to that data controller running on premises in your offline data center, and you can go and create new databases and managed instances.
Okay, great.
So if you go back to the main area here, so I have a billing question, a pricing question, and then so it's interesting to look at logic apps and say, when I'm actually connecting things, now when I run this logic app that will be running, so I'll just call it on-prem. I know it can be another cloud. I'll just say on-prem, right? That means that then I have that logic app would actually have access to on-prem systems I would not normally have access to in the cloud, which then really opens up my use for logic apps, which is very cool. Now, the hard question. I think logic apps, you pay like by the number of calls or whatever. And since it's actually running on my hardware on-prem, is there any pricing difference?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Scroll down here and you can see here, I just want to say, because in your portal, it currently doesn't show the preview tag behind it, like logic apps and stuff like that. But the application services, as you can see here on the bottom, these are basically like the collection of app service, logic apps, functions, and so on. And they're currently still in preview. We announced them at Build this year. So there's no cost yet, and we did not really speak about how the billing for these is done currently. Same thing for the data services part. However, the data services part will go GA, I think, and we announced it already. I think it will be end of July. And then we obviously will have the billing information for it, how it will be. There will be definitely some cost involved. I have no idea, really. I obviously wouldn't tell you, but no, but seriously, I have no idea what the pricing model is going to be for these app services, for example.
Okay. And so when a resource is connected, basically all of the identity access management roles apply across the board for all the different identities that are out there.
Yeah,
that's true.
So you can see here, like there's also, by the way, interesting part here about the non-cost. So if you want to try out, if customers here or if someone watching this or listening to it, if you want to try Azure Arc, the base set of services, again, attaching a server or a Kubernetes cluster is actually free, right? And then you get all the good things even already from Azure Resource Manager. So if you want to do inventory, grouping and tagging of resources, that is all at no cost. As soon as you then start taking advantage of like some of the higher management services, like for example, if you want to use Azure Defender, or if you want to use Azure Monitor, Log Analytics, and so on, there's obviously some cost involved, as it has been like with outside resources all the time. The same thing as you can see also for the guest policy part, which in Azure, obviously is free for Azure VMs, but for servers running outside of Azure, we charge you there. And the same kind of like applies for the Kubernetes part. And coming back to your identity question, obviously since this is now like adding your servers or Kubernetes clusters as Azure resources, you can then also obviously, you have the identity and access menu. So basically, you can use it as same as you would do for an Azure resource. So if you have like groups or something in Azure AD to manage certain groups of servers, you can handle that the exact same amount. So what we actually have now is we have customers removing admin rights from their administrators to a minimum on all of their systems, and they need to go through Azure Arc using the portal or the CLI or whatever to actually administrate these servers. That gives them a couple of advantages. They have now a single control plane also for their identity. So they can actually say, hey, I'm just working with these groups. And then they also have an advantage that they have auditing support, right? So if I go and change a setting here, like if I would have a server here in the portal, the same thing as I would have for an Azure VM, and I'm gonna do like, I push the update button, for example, then that would be in the auditing log, right? And so the same thing now applies obviously for servers running outside of Azure. So there's some pretty cool stuff going on. The same, and with Kubernetes clusters, I get this question also a lot when we talk about identity. If you run AKS, for example, you can also connect, like you have your Azure Active Directory connected to the Kubernetes cluster, so you can even in your Kubernetes cluster take advantage of identities from Azure AD. And by default, in on-premises cluster, you can't really do that. Now with Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes clusters, you can even extend that. So you can also do the same thing there with Kubernetes clusters which are not running inside Azure.
So One of the things I'm thinking about is, the enterprise customers I deal with migrating their apps to the cloud. They end up either doing a lift and shift, or which I'm a lot of times against because they're not taking advantage of everything. But this is really something to take a look at how to utilize this in the process of migrating to the cloud. That really opens the door to doing one app at a time or whatever. Because usually it's an all or nothing scenario. I mean, how much have you looked at how this is going to impact the planning for migrating complex applications to the cloud?
Oh, it definitely can, right? It's definitely, it can be, as you mentioned, it can be a huge benefit in certain scenarios. Also for the migration part, not just for something which obviously stays, but also for things where you say, hey, at one point I have I want to use these identities. I want to switch to that. I don't want to have two management tools. I don't want to have two identity tools.
Logic apps is more like what I'm talking about, moving data around and all that stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. So if you want to build that automation with logic apps, yes, go ahead. This is absolutely something you could do. You could go out, and I haven't really saw that scenario yet, but I found it super interesting. I have to admit, I also didn't speak to many customers about how to leverage that in migration yet. But yeah, absolutely. If
a lot of customers I'm talking to, they have 30 apps that basically talk to each other somehow, some way, right? It's like, all right, How do we get to the cloud? We can't move all 30 at once, or do we move all 30 at once, or whatever? And I think this really opens the door for them to be able to start moving one app at a time and have an efficient way for it to look like the old infrastructure to those applications, which I think is incredible, because that will actually help with the migration to the cloud.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah,
awesome.
Like to connect all this together. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I got a couple of Raspberry Pis and a couple of Philips and IoT devices, and I see that Trip 8472 talked about where you and Kurt wrote a blog. So now those two boxes are sort of sitting over there, I could build up and put in my lab a little bit, right? Added to the growing list of things that I'm going to lab out, right? This has been very interesting, Thomas. It how you can hear it, you hear the announcement, you'll sort of half read the docs, but hearing you explain and be able to understand, use case scenarios. That's the reason I asked the question, was it a security product or a management product? It seems to be a management product that takes advantage of security controls, that if you want to leverage them there, it's an enabling product. Yep. So I don't cover that industry that has a huge request for it, but I see it, like my peers who are using retail, lots of legacy, education, lots of legacy, healthcare, huge lots of legacy, right? But I can see a couple other scenarios. But I'm seeing some places that are possibly in the verticals that I cover, FSI, which includes insurance. Like I can't mention the customer's name here. I can't mention the client, but I'm sure that some industries that are very seasonal, tax season, they spin up huge Kubernetes clusters to handle the workload. And then as the season boils down, they do it, but they still have a lot of legacy assets that they've invested in. They're not quite ready to cut the ties yet, right? So really good stuff here. I want to read up on a little bit more. Do you have a blog or anything that our listeners can follow you on, and make sure we get that? And we want to post it out there to get everyone to follow you. It's giving me some ideas, specifically because in the pricing, everything is sort of free, but the very thing that I were interested in Arc, which is around policy, is $6 a month. So I want to go see if you start enforcing these policies, and Azure Arc is verifying the compliance of these policies. It's $6 a month for a server, which in the grand scheme of things, right? If you got to ask how much it is, you can't afford it. Is that the old saying? So
exactly.
I want to play with that and take a look at it.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. I have a couple of resources, by the way, which I highly would recommend to follow and also to read. So first of all, obviously, as you mentioned, like I need to do some advertisement here, my own blog. And obviously, I write a log about Azure Arc at the moment. It's thomasmaurer.ch. That will be like where you can go. Our team also blogs a lot about like IT ops related topics, and our team blog is on Microsoft Tech Community, and you can find it on itopstalk.com. And then last but not least, especially for you now, because you want to play around with Azure Arc, I highly recommend the Azure Arc Jumpstart project. So this is arcjumpstart.io. And this is basically from Microsoft team. It's also a CSA team, which basically goes out and created these automation pieces to actually play around with Azure Arc onboard systems. So if you want to simulate something, like if you want to create a lab or something like that, absolutely perfect. It can take, like if you want to play out and you want to go out and deploy, for example, the data controller and the managed instance, they built whole automation scripts for that. So you can really do that really quickly without doing all the pain. They also simulate some stuff, so you can run it in your Azure environment, for example. But you can also run it, obviously, like in real environments as well. So the Azure Arc Jumpstart.io project is a really, really good one if you want to get started and play around with Azure Arc.
We'll grab all that stuff from you. You answered my Doug question, like, can I run Azure Arc on an Azure VM? Which is sort of the feeding purpose, right? Because I want to put Defender on it, but I can see why you would do it that way also.
So, I actually think that I put Azure Arc on the labs for SC200, by the way.
You did?
I'm trying to look that up. Yeah. Okay. So should be out there. It's
Thomas.
First of all, everybody, it's easy enough. This is click, point, go, that sort of thing. So nothing to be afraid of. So
yeah, it's similar. You generate a script like you were doing inside MDE. If you got snail mail script, you got 1 or 2 machines, you do it. If you have multiple generates, I suppose I would suspect that the script, if you do it that way, only lasts a certain amount of days, right? And if there's an onboarding script, there must be an offboarding script also. I actually have a container running in my lab that I use as a log collector for MCAS. I think I'm gonna throw it on there and see what happens. And then I think I got a Linux box around here somewhere in my lab. I think I might throw it on that too. I'm running a mainstream distro, so I don't think it'd be a problem with that. I'm running Ubuntu 18.04 or something like that. So we'll take a look at it. Well, Thomas, thank you so much. We try to stay straight to it. Wednesday is sort of like semi-date night. I don't know why Frank wants the podcast on Wednesday. He knows this, right? You're welcome to the show at any time. I know there's announcements come out. You don't have to wait for an invite to come back and say, hey, I want to tell you guys something really cool about what I'm doing, what my group is doing. You can always send us anything about your blog. We'll repost it. Rod is a prolific writer. I'm sure if you give it out, he'll rewrite it and send it out and do all that other stuff, right? This has been interesting. I took some good notes. I answered the questions I had written down, so I didn't sound like a complete doofus. Didn't know what it was, right? Frank, I'm Frank Prime. That's the other Frank, right? See, Frank Prime.
Definitely, I've only looked at Azure Arc as as the management of servers for going into the security side. Everything else here that I learned tonight is awesome, and also thinking about how it can be applied to current customers and also customers migrating. I think it's really opened up a lot of opportunity in the market. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, Frank. Thank you for having me, Edward. It was absolutely awesome and a lot of fun spending time with you and talking about these things. I had some really good questions here, and obviously I love talking about these things. And thank you for the invite to come back. I really appreciate it. And I, again, can just say thank you again.
Yeah, enjoy some of the quiet time. If it's quiet time on your side of the world, I know it's got to be almost 1 a.m. So grab some sleep in tomorrow, take the day off. Take the day off. You're good to go, right? Everyone, thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and we'll sign off. Thank you.